I should have known something was wrong when my Aunt Diane insisted I take that business trip. She'd been unusually helpful, even offering to watch over Grandpa while I was gone to Chicago. "Don't worry about him," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll make sure he gets everything he needs." Grandpa had been in the hospital for 3 weeks after his stroke. The doctors said he was stable but would need time to recover. I've been staying at the hospital every day, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed, talking to him even though he couldn't respond. But Diane thought I was wasting my time. "He's gone, Tommy," she'd said repeatedly. "You're just prolonging the inevitable." My Uncle Paul agreed. "The medical bills are piling up. We need to think practically." I'd ignored them. Grandpa had raised me after my parents died when I was 12. I wasn't giving up on him after 3 weeks. But the conference was important for my career, and Diane had been so insistent. Against my better judgment, I'd agreed to go for just 2 days. The call came at 6 a.m. on my second day in Chicago. "Tommy," Diane's voice was matter-of-fact, almost cheerful. "We're taking him off life support this morning. It's for the best." My heart stopped. "You can't do that without me. I'm flying back right now." "The decision's already been made," Diane said coldly. "Paul and I are his next of kin. We have the legal authority. I'll be there in 4 hours. Don't do anything until I get there." "Tommy, be reasonable. He's suffering. We're doing the humane thing." I hung up and ran for the airport, my heart pounding with panic and rage. The flight back was the longest 3 hours of my life. I called the hospital repeatedly, but they said the family had already signed the paperwork. I arrived at the hospital at 2 p.m. and raced to the intensive care unit. The room where Grandpa had been was empty, the bed stripped clean. I was too late. I found Diane and Paul in the waiting area, calmly filling out discharge paperwork. "Where is he?" I demanded. Diane looked up with practiced sympathy. "He passed peacefully about an hour ago. It was very quick once we removed the machines." I stared at them in disbelief. "You killed him." "We ended his suffering," Paul corrected. "The doctors said he had no chance of recovery." The funeral was small and cold. Diane and Paul made all the arrangements, choosing the cheapest options and rushing through the service. "He left the house to all 3 of us," Paul told me after the funeral. "We should put it on the market immediately. That's $100,000 each." 3 days later, I went to the hospital to collect Grandpa's belongings. The nurse on duty was someone I recognized from my daily visits. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said gently. "Your grandfather talked about you constantly." "He talked." I was confused. I thought he was unconscious. The nurse looked surprised. "Oh no, he was awake quite a bit during his last week. He was asking for you every day." My blood ran cold. "He was awake?" "Yes, especially the last few days. He was getting stronger, actually. We were optimistic about his recovery." She paused, looking confused. "That's why we were surprised when the family decided to withdraw care." "What exactly did he say about me?" "He kept asking when Tommy was coming back. He said he had something important to tell you. He seemed very upset that you weren't there." She handed me a plastic bag with Grandpa's belongings, then called out as I was leaving. "Wait, there's one more thing. Your grandfather asked me to give this to Tommy specifically. He was very insistent about it." She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I drove to Grandpa's empty house and sat in his favorite chair before opening the letter. "My dear Tommy, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and Diane and Paul have gotten their way. You deserve to know the truth about your family. I've been awake for most of this past week, contrary to what they've told you. The doctors said I was making remarkable progress and might come home in another week. But Diane and Paul don't want me to recover. Yesterday, they came to see me while you were away. They thought I was unconscious, but I heard every word. Diane told Paul they needed to end the charade before you got back. She said keeping me alive was eating into their inheritance, and they couldn't afford to wait." Paul agreed. He said the medical bills were already over $200,000, and every day I stayed alive was money out of their pockets. "Tommy, they're planning to kill me not because I'm dying, but because they want me dead. But there's something else you need to know about your parents' accident. 23 years ago, your parents died in that car crash on Highway 9. The police said your father fell asleep at the wheel. But I never believed that story and now I have proof. Last month, I hired a private investigator. Your parents had just met with their lawyer the day before they died. They were planning to update their will to leave everything to you, cutting Diane and Paul out completely. Your parents had discovered that Diane and Paul had been stealing money from the family business for years. They had evidence of embezzlement and were going to press charges. The investigator found that Diane's husband knew a mechanic who had worked on your parents' car the day before the accident. That mechanic is now dead, but his widow told the investigator something disturbing. Her husband had come home the night before your parents' accident and told her he'd done something terrible to a car's brake system. Someone had paid him $10,000 to make it look like an accident. A week later, he died of a heart attack. He was only 35 with no history of heart problems. Tommy, I believe Diane and Paul murdered your parents to inherit the family business and prevent the embezzlement charges. I've hidden all the evidence in my safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser. Box number 1247. Inside that box, you'll find asterisk the private investigator's complete report, asterisk copies of financial records showing their theft, asterisk a recording device documenting their conversations, asterisk my real will, which leaves everything to you. The will they're planning to use is fake. Paul forged it last year. Son, I'm sorry I couldn't protect your parents, and I'm sorry I won't be there to protect you. But I've given you the tools you need to get justice. Diane and Paul have been living off blood money for 23 years. They killed your parents, stole from our family, and now they're killing me to cover their tracks. Don't let them get away with it. The lawyer who has my real will is Jonathan Pierce at Pierce & Associates. I love you more than words can say. Get justice for all of us. All my love, Grandpa. I read the letter 3 times before it sank in. My parents hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered by Diane and Paul, who had then spent 23 years pretending to grieve while living off stolen money. I found a key exactly where Grandpa had said. The safety deposit box contained everything he'd promised. The private investigator's report was thorough and damning. Photos, documents, witness statements, and financial records that painted a clear picture of decades of crime. But the most shocking item was a small recording device. Grandpa had been secretly recording conversations for months. I listened to recording after recording of Diane and Paul discussing how to handle the old man, how much money they'd save if he died, and their detailed plans to withdraw life support while I was away. In one chilling conversation, Diane said, "Once the old bastard is dead, we can sell the house and split everything with Tommy. He'll never suspect what really happened to his parents." Paul had laughed. Just like we planned 20 years ago. Sometimes the best crime is the one that looks like an accident. I called Jonathan Pierce immediately. He'd been waiting for this call for over a year. "Tommy," he said when I identified myself, "I'm so sorry about your grandfather. He was a good man who loved you very much. Mr. Pierce, I have his final letter and the contents of his safety deposit box. Then it's time to bring his plan into action. Your grandfather spent months preparing for this moment." The next morning, while Diane and Paul were meeting with a realtor about selling Grandpa's house, federal agents arrested them both on charges of murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, and elder abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. The private investigator had done his work well, and Grandpa's recordings provided clear proof of their guilt. The trial lasted 6 months. The prosecution presented Grandpa's evidence methodically, building an airtight case that showed decades of criminal behavior. The mechanic's widow testified about her husband's confession. Financial experts demonstrated how Diane and Paul had systematically stolen from the family business. And the recordings spoke for themselves. In one particularly damning recording played for the jury, Diane could be heard saying, "We got away with it once 23 years ago. We can get away with it again." Diane and Paul were convicted on all charges. Diane received life in prison without parole for the murder of my parents. Paul got 25 to life. Both received additional sentences for elder abuse and embezzlement. But the greatest victory was the truth. After 23 years, the world finally knew that my parents hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered by people they trusted. Grandpa's real will stood up in court, leaving me his entire estate, including the house, his investments, and his share of the family business that Diane and Paul had been stealing from for decades. The total value was over $2 million. But more than the money, Grandpa had given me justice. He'd made sure that his murderers and my parents' murderers would spend the rest of their lives in prison. 6 months after the trial, I established the Robert Henderson Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention, using part of my inheritance to help other families protect vulnerable seniors. Every year on the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I visit his grave and read him updates about the foundation, about the families we've helped, and about the additional criminals we've exposed. Grandpa's final act wasn't just about getting justice for himself and my parents. It was about making sure no other family would suffer what we'd suffered. Diane and Paul thought they could commit the perfect crime twice, but they underestimated a dying old man's love for his grandson and his determination to protect the innocent. In the end, Grandpa got the last word, and his final message wasn't just a letter. It was a promise that justice would be served, no matter how long it took.